So I qualified in 1999, and I found that as soon as when I set up my practice, the first benefit that clients seemed to have was an improvement in their sleep. And I knew that was partly because I was able to advise them on how to protect themselves against electromagnetic radiation. But I was still kind of intrigued, so it became an area of special focus for me. And then, fast forward 20 years, and Jan said to me, you know, there's a conference, this was September 2019, about 5G, you must come. And I thought, oh yeah, actually I would like to know more about 5G. It sounded concerning, but I didn't know much about it. And it was such an eye-opener, because there were all these scientists there who'd done tens of thousands of studies on the effects of electromagnetic radiation. And my thought was, well, hang on a minute, why aren't we hearing about this? And why isn't somebody doing something about it? And cutting a long story short, I discovered that Arthur Furstenberg, who wrote a book called The Invisible Rainbow, had been researching this stuff since the 1970s, in fact. So I reached out to him, and he invited me to be part of his weekly sort of brainstorming group, which we called ourselves, after a time, originally Stop 5G International. Then, for various reasons, we've recently changed it to Safe Tech International. Arthur went his own way, but we've carried on with our vision and events and so forth to raise awareness about this issue. So I've kind of made the assumption that you guys probably have a pretty good basic understanding of electromagnetic radiation. So I'm not going to go too deeply into the science because it's such a huge subject, and we haven't got all night. So I'm going to give you a broad brushstroke around the bigger, what I call the bigger picture. And I'm happy to send people any of the information that I refer to, so you won't need to take photos unless you especially want to. And if it all seems a bit like doom and gloom at times, hang on in there, because I will also be covering what we can do. So basically, you know, as I will show, electrosmog, as it's known as, is increasing exponentially and becoming more and more harmful. And while 5G expands this even further and makes things even worse. So I'll be covering the health impacts, the so-called safety standards, what is 5G in the bigger picture, also smart technology, what we can do to protect ourselves, and what is being done about the situation. So we all know, I'm sure, that the Earth's natural frequencies are the beneficial ones that we all need. I mean, it varies minute by minute, but overall, it kind of, if you plot it on a graph, it has a slow rolling curve. And I remember William Spear, I think it was, saying that if you were to depict that as a musical note, it would be a bit like, and I'm giving my age away here, again, Rolf Harris's didgeridoo, you know, that sort of wow, wow. And as you probably also know, when astronauts went out of the Earth's magnetic field, initially they became quite ill, and that had to be replicated in order for them to have the Schumann resonance that we need. So then when you look at graphs showing artificial man-made frequencies, it's jagged. And if you translated that into a sound, it's like, I think Bill Spear said it was like nails scratching on a chalkboard or something. In fact, I recently happened to hear a recording of the sound of 5G coming off the masts, and it's horrible, I can only say. Some colleagues of mine actually get headaches when they do meter readings. So basically, the artificial waves have they go up to much, much higher frequencies. So what are frequencies? The frequency is the number of cycles per second. So the Earth's field is very slow, as I say, and undulating, and artificially created fields get faster and faster. And so, with, 1 gigahertz means the electromagnetic wave is varying at 1 million times per second. And the higher the frequency, the faster it's transmitted. So it's pulsed, which is so different from what the natural radiation that we've lived in for millions of years. In fact, the levels of frequency radiation now is a quintillion times that it was 50 years ago. I'm not quite sure that my brain can even visualize a quintillion times. Whereas air pollution, for example, is double what it was 50 years ago. And yet, again, we never read about the radio frequency radiation in the press, perhaps because we can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, people think it doesn't exist. So the impacts of radiation depend on the distance you are from the source, the level of the irradiated power, the frequency and the type of signal, and the length of time of exposure. So, and of course, nobody has actually calculated the effects of the cocktail of accumulative effects of all the different levels of radiation, so as we'll see. Now, you might think, well, but they've got safety standards. Well, yes, but you know, what they measure is what they call the specific absorption rate, the amount of electromagnetic frequency that the human body absorbs. And they measure that by putting an artificial person's head in a special chamber, and they measure it only in terms of the temperature effects over the length of a 6-minute call. And I think it's fair to say we all spend a lot more than 6 minutes on the phone. This SAR, as they call it, was devised. It's actually devised by a body who is sponsored by the industry, and no health organizations are involved at all. So some of the things I saw at the conference that I just mentioned are, for example, thermal imagery of, because you see, the amount of absorption varies from person to person anyway. And particularly for children, as you can see, a 5-year-old it's absorbed far more deeply into the skull than a 10-year-old or an adult, which doesn't mean it's great for adults either, incidentally. And by the way, I've also seen thermal imagery of cancer patients, for example, who've had, like women who put their phone in their breast pocket, and you can actually see the shape of the cancer outlines the shape of the phone. It's quite shocking. And here you can see the way that your blood cells go into a sort of rouleau shape when people are exposed to smart meters. So you've got changes in the blood, oxidative stress, it disrupts the immune system, and so forth. I mean, in effect, would you put your head in a microwave oven? Well, I don't even use the things, but that's by the by. Because, frankly, long-term smartphone use might be just as reckless, because no standardized industry safety measures have ever accurately measured the risks. In fact, no risk assessments have been done, basically. So it's been termed the largest unethical medical experiment in human history. And it's quite interesting because, again, you know, looking at the studies that are carried out by people who are not in the industry, 70% show harmful effects. The ones sponsored by the industry only show 32%. So the vice president of the New York State United Teachers said, we have enough evidence to justify taking action, and we're not willing to wait until our members, their children and the students suffer health consequences for not doing anything. The history of occupational disease shows the devastating consequences of doing just that, i.e., if we think back to the way that smoking was promoted for many years as being beneficial, and so on and so forth, many other situations like that. So, you know, the impacts at a cellular level can be seen to be killing the good bacteria in the gut, oxidative stress, which allows more toxins in the body, insomnia, depression, dehydration, tiredness, DNA changes, cancer, and infertility as well, actually. So, you know, the impacts on animals as well, of, when they've done studies, show that there's definitely defective testicular function in rats. So we're not rats, admittedly, but I mean, I think there is a lot of concern. There are a number of organizations that are concerned about why male sperm count has depleted so rapidly, and then again, so many people put their phone in their trouser pocket. Again, animals, birds use the Earth's magnetic field for navigation, and they're losing their way, literally. Bees, I've seen pictures of bees dropping dead when new 5G masts are installed. And as I've heard said, when the bees are all dead, you might as well eat your smartphones. Then mums across America are very concerned about this too, because schools have been installing Wi-Fi and cell towers by the thousands in the last few years. And strangely enough, they've had a huge increase in these kind of things: headaches, nosebleeds, brain fog, fatigue. Well, I won't read it all out, but you get the idea. And people tend to attribute the harmful effects to other things. But, you know, typical school classroom readings result in anything from 37,000 to 1.7 million microwatts per square meter. So, as a summary of radiation impacts, it depletes minerals in the body with immediate impact in thyroid function. It impacts cellular function, generates huge amounts of toxins, interferes with our energy centers on a number of different levels, from a point of view of acupuncture, for example, interferes with the pineal gland, melatonin production, and our circadian rhythm, hence the effects on sleep. Changes in the brain-blood barrier, which allows more toxins to enter the brain, liver enlargement, and it, interestingly, affects a cortex in the brain that has to do with feelings of human connection. And I do wonder sometimes when you hear about the increased numbers of shootings in America and so on, it just feels as though that humans seem to be having less, perhaps in some situations, less human connection with one another. Then there's internal heat affecting our thermal regulation, DNA changes, and interfering with vision and smell, actually. It's quite interesting, I thought. So what is 5G and why is it more harmful? Well, basically, apart from the fact that it uses much higher power density, and of course it requires far more users, which I'll show you later, a combination of small antennae and masts at regular intervals, so that the idea being for a broader number of devices to communicate with each other all the time. So we can choose if we want to switch off our phones, we can choose if we don't want to smoke, but we can't choose, we have no choice in the matter if something's being put out into the atmosphere without our permission. And of course, wildlife and so forth has no choice either. So, you know, 5G is dramatically increasing exposures to radiation. And so our exposure, as I've said, has exploded beyond belief. And you can see from the study here that actually the adverse health effects begin at very low levels, lower than the regulatory authorities say is dangerous. But you can see that once they put 5G masts in place, the levels increase exponentially. So there's always a significant increase in radiation. And they've also, the distance, as I've said, is very important. So the image on the left is the maximum levels that are recommended by an organization based in Germany. But the right-hand side are the actual levels. Especially once you get within 600 meters, 2,000 feet. So, yeah, you get the idea. And here we can see how the increases come about. You've got the old-fashioned phones going right up to the kind of phones we use nowadays. And then with 5G, it connects with so many other devices, as we'll see. So, and also the beams go in all directions. Again, I can send people more detail about this because it would be long and complicated to explain. But basically, you've got these, you know, you may well have seen these huge, great big masts, and then you've got the small antennae, and it's all, you know, going off in all directions. So it kind of creates concentric circles. Now, in terms of the bigger picture, there's a lot of other things involved that people are not aware of. So in order to facilitate what's planned and what's being done, it's necessary to have hundreds of thousands of satellites. As you may be aware, the Earth, as well as the ozone layer, the Earth has an ionosphere, it's known as, the lower ionosphere, which is a protective electrical circuit around us, which basically should keep us within the levels of electromagnetic radiation, the helpful ones that we need. But the satellites are being put already into the lower ionosphere, as opposed to existing satellites which are into the higher ionosphere. The idea being to form a grid of satellites which will encircle the entire planet. I'm so sorry to give you this bad news, but I think it's important that people know. So that it will be impossible to go off-grid. And there are a lot of people who are electrosensitive who really have to. I think to a certain extent we probably all are, whether we know it or not, but we have different levels of propensity. And the other dangers posed by the satellites, just by the way, are space debris, because these things have a limited shelf life and bits come off them, and a lot of organizations are very concerned because it's not a matter of if some bits of debris will collide, but when. Then they deplete the ozone layer, but we don't hear anything about that. And remember all the stuff about the ozone layer a few decades ago? There's huge amounts of pollution from the rocket launches, an increase in already harmful levels of electromagnetic radiation. They interfere with astronomical research and weather forecasting. So there's a lot of different people that are concerned about this. And then, of course, there's the fact that they facilitate surveillance and erosion of our privacy and vastly more energy consumption, of which more later. So, you know, they say that it's to bridge the digital divide, but actually, wired in is so much more reliable, and we don't need to rely on Wi-Fi and so forth. It doesn't actually give us faster download speeds and what have you. Then there's smart lights. So the other thing that 5G offers are, so because all the devices need to be connected, there's 5G, and you might have noticed the new street lights that got a little sort of bobble on top. They're not necessarily yet connected to 5G, but that's what they're there for. The idea being, again, to connect to every single thing in our environment. And you might have heard about Mark Steele, probably one of the first well-known campaigners, and unfortunately a rather notorious one, but he did nevertheless successfully prosecute Gateshead Council and won his case because the evidence concluded that the new smart 5G arrays on the top of the lampposts emit class 1 radiation frequencies and should be treated as a danger to the public. And amazingly, the judge stated the public have a right to know. And in fact, the insurance companies know it very well because they will not insure against adverse effects from 5G radiation masts. Oh, and by the way, Mark Steele discovered what he did because he found the companies, whatever, installing this stuff in the middle of the night, which is kind of a bit strange. Anyway, then there's the Internet of Underwater Things, which is perhaps more worrying still, because what they're planning is to have devices on the ocean floor connecting with masts at the side of the ocean, which then beam up to the satellites. So they will rely primarily on sonar, which has been known to adversely impact whales and other marine animals, and that's been known for many decades. And they play a vital role in ecology, actually, because whales and other sea mammals, but the whales particularly absorb huge amounts of carbon, which they then take down to the ocean floor, so it's sequestering it. And other sea life is reliant on whales because of the fecal plumes actually have nutrients in. So it's not about, never mind about saving the whale, the whales are saving us, but what are we doing to them? Then there's the Internet of Things. Funnily enough, Boris Johnson did actually warn the UN in 2018 in a speech about the dangers of having a dystopian world in which everything connects, and yet that's exactly what they seem to be planning now. So, you know, it will enable everything to be connected. So, you know, you go shopping and your phone tells you that you shouldn't buy milk today because you've got some in the fridge or whatever. I mean, I personally don't want to live in that sort of world. You might, I don't know. Then 5G will be followed by 6G, which will basically enable artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, and they, again, need to be, the base stations need to be connected by high-speed wireless links that offer data rates of tens or even hundreds of gigabits per second. And there's the Internet of Bodies, so that you would have an implantable device in your hand, which will have your identity, I mean, I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. You know, it will include everything that can be known about you, your bank balance, your everything, basically. And then there's also the metaverse. Well, I'll go into that later. But and 5G is not green, incidentally. That's the reason we're told it's important to have it, because to manufacture one smartphone requires hundreds of substances, as you can see, as well as industrial scale extraction and smelting, vast amounts of energy and water, greenhouse gases and other toxins are created. There's worker hazards. I mean, we have no idea of what the people that make this stuff and mine for this are subjected to. And then there's a huge loss in wildlife habitat. So France's High Council for Climate says 5G technology will lead to a significant increase in the carbon footprint of digital technology. So a common question is, well, if this is all so bad, why do they keep pushing it? I mean, I think money talks, to be honest. I mean, the tech industry is now, I believe, the wealthiest in the world. So that's one main, and plus, and again, I'm not making this up because you can look on the World Economic Forum's website, it's all there in plain sight. Their agenda is that we will have, as I explained before, a digital identity so that everything will be known about us. It will connect to smart cities, our healthcare, financial services, you know, you name it, everything. So, what can we do? Let's get to some good news. Well, going into a bit more detail in a minute, and again, I can send people anything they need in the way of information, but number one is reducing our use of wireless, learning about the dangers and alternative options, protecting ourselves as much as possible, and keeping our energy strong and balanced as well, and not getting dragged down into negativity about it, and saying no to 5G. So the wired-in is always the best option. If you can't avoid it, then at least turn off Wi-Fi at night and use network cables directly from the router for internet connection. Exposure time, distance, and intensity make a difference. So try to stay as far away as possible. Use things as far away as possible. A minimum of 10 meters from Wi-Fi routers and 1 kilometer from antennas, if you can manage that. Turn mobiles off or put them in flight mode as much as you can, certainly if it's in your pocket. Turn off your wireless signal at night for a good sleep, or don't have wireless at all. And so on. Some of this repeats. And ideally, I mean, there are ways of protection, which I will go into in a moment, but ideally, you probably should get a professional to measure the levels and work out what the best methods of protection are for you if you're electrosensitive and experiencing problems. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that the industry knows that you shouldn't put mobile phones near your head, incidentally, because it does have it in the guidelines if you dig into the instructions. Avoid Bluetooth. You can get what they call anti-radiation earphones. You can put, if you've got a mast outside your bedroom or living room window, you can put mirrored film on the windows, which I don't think it's visible from outside, but it reflects back the electromagnetic free radiation. Crystals, of course, I'm sure all aware of. A copper bracelet can be helpful, evidently. I'm told by a colleague that you can even use rolls of copper that's available in garden centres, sold as slug repellent, but I haven't tried it. If you can't have a wired-in modem, you can place shields over them, or if you're sensitive to the signal, there are bed canopies available. I'm personally not a huge fan of these fabrics and clothing that protect people, because we also need the good electromagnetic radiation, the Earth's frequency. And if we block everything out, then we're not going to get, then we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's my personal take on it. So there's tons of information, but, you know, again, some of this repeats what I've said before. But yes, you can also get phone shields, which are a good idea, though I wouldn't want anybody to feel that because they've got some kind of shielding thing on their phone that, oh, it's okay now, I can use it as much as I like, etc. And above all, we also have to look at our internal environment, which I'll go into in a moment. To detox with all this, with all these toxins and so on, and regenerate, I'll just whiz through this very quickly. So all kind of basic stuff: drinking filtered water, reduce, you know, changes of diet. And as I say, George Osawa cured people after Hiroshima of radiation sickness with the macrobiotic diet. Not that I'm saying that diet particularly is right for everybody, but it's, you know, there's green juices, herbal extracts. I find ashwagandha, a Ayurvedic herb, it was very, evidently it protects against electromagnetic radiation. I've just always found it good for sleep. Seaweed, of course, leaches toxins from the body. Colloidal silver, iodine, almost anything green and sulfuric, chlorella, algae, broccoli sprouts, and so forth. And glutathione. And then, of course, there's other lifestyle things, walking barefoot on grass whenever we can. The point being to get back in touch with nature, because we've become so distanced from it, especially in recent years. You know, regular exercise and exposure to sunlight, eating a rainbow of vegetables and so on. As I say, spending time in nature. I'm very lucky to have woodland near me that I can walk in for an hour a day usually, and hugging trees, hug a human even, meditate every day. I think the thing is, knowing this stuff, it would be very easy to get dragged down into despair and negativity, and it's very important for our inner world that we don't, and that actually has an impact on our health. So meditating or any kind of healing technique that floats your boat, and getting enough sleep, respecting your body's rhythm, because we can do things 24/7. I often see emails have been sent to me, you know, in the middle of the night and so forth. So what is being done about the situation? Too many things to list here, but just to give you a bit of flavour, in the United States, we had a bit of a breakthrough, actually, because they basically, sorry, I'm trying to figure out the simplest way to, basically the federal court ordered the FCC, the Federation of Communications something, to explain why it ignored scientific evidence showing harm from wireless radiation. So that was really a breakthrough. One of the first studies to actually show the effects of 5G, as opposed to the levels that we already had in our environment, has recently been published. definitively showing the health effects of 5G radiation and microwave syndrome, as it's known also. That all of these things are peer-reviewed studies, obviously. So the case study also confirmed that, once again, radiation well below levels allowed by the authorities causes ill health. Then the New Hampshire 5G Commission concluded there was sufficient evidence to justify a ruling that masts should be no less than 1,640 feet or 500 meters from where people live or schools. Interestingly, they consulted 9 experts, and the only one that was paid, employed by the telecommunications industry, was the only one to say that cell phone radiation was not a problem. And they based it on studies such as this that show that the nearer people live or work from a cell tower, as they call it, the higher the rates of mortality from things like cancer. Pittsfield Board of Health in Massachusetts sent an emergency cease and desist order to Verizon, one of their mobile phone companies, after they discovered that as soon as the masts had gone up, people living near them had started to have major health incidents. I also heard of, there's a case being pursued by Michael Mansfield, and the lawyers went to visit somebody who had experienced health effects from a mast that had been put near their house. And while the lawyers were sitting in the garden, they started to feel ill. They started to have a sense of burning on their skin. One of them became so ill afterwards. And these were people who had no knowledge about 5G before the case began. She's had to give up work and live in a hut with no electricity or anything. She's become so sensitive. Anyway, that's by the by. So yes, speaking of that case, permission has now been granted for Michael Mansfield to challenge the Secretary of State on the failure to give adequate information to the public about the risks of 5G, and to explain the absence of a process for investigation of any adverse health effects. Because he feels, it basically the grounds advance a breach of the Human Rights Act. And there was an article recently, I thought this was rather interesting. In the Daily Mail, there was an article about this kind of thing. And within 24 hours, I'm not sure if it says how many, thousands of people responded with their concerns. So it goes to show that we can make our voices heard, actually, I believe. And if we don't, well, anyhow. Because let's not forget that there is a safer alternative. As I say, wired technologies are more reliable, more resilient, more energy efficient, and more easily defended from cyber attacks. They're significantly less hazardous to our health and basically better ensure the survival of not just us, but other life forms with whom we share our precious planet. So in Safe Tech International, we talk quite a lot about not just what we don't want, but what do we want? What kind of world do we want? We don't want to go back to the dark ages without electricity, obviously. So our statement, if you like, is that maybe we would prefer a world where we have the right to live safely in our homes and our neighborhoods, and that takes precedence over industry profits, where satellite deployment is halted and we can once again partake of our common heritage, the unobstructed skies, where 5G, 6G, or any other G is replaced by safe technology that has undergone scrutiny to ensure the health and well-being of all life on the planet, where people are connected face-to-face and heart-to-heart, not consumed by ubiquitous virtual connectivity, because we've become so used to the convenience of doing everything remotely, but actually what we need is connection. Where we connect to the internet only when and where we choose, and primarily through hardwired technology, as I've said, not wirelessly through the air, where digital orphans are reunited with their parents and tech addiction becomes a relic of the past. How many times, I'm sure you've also seen, families in a restaurant who once would have been chatting, all looking at their tablets, including some very young children, where the increasingly frenetic pace of hyperconnectivity is slowed down so we can once again connect to our own humanity, and where the pursuit of faster, bigger, and more is replaced with contentment with just enough, and where respect for life takes precedence over corporate self-gain. In short, a future that respects and protects all life on this planet. So, you know, I haven't got time to go into it now, but I can send people plenty of information about what we can do, simple actions that we can take to raise awareness about this issue. We might not all be able to raise court cases, but there are simple things we can do, and how to inform ourselves, because as informed citizens, we can address the questions and problems of our technological era. Because I believe that they're banking on us not doing that and thereby acquiescing. And it's so important that we don't do that. So you're more than welcome to look on the SafeTech International website. In my handouts, there's links to loads of other websites that have got masses of information. And you're very welcome as well to email me with any questions. Because I don't know.